even after the Schuylers have passed away, you would have not seen these buildings. Instead, you would have seen open, rolling pasture land with hedges, trees, cattle grazing, sheep grazing.
Yeah.
You could have seen all the way down to the Hudson River itself and across to the other shore. At this point, it's a little bit closer today than it would have been a little bit closer at the time than it is today. A couple of 100 yards, basically about where you see that tall brick building out there. Everywhere where the Port of Albany is today, that would have been water at the time. The Port of Albany is built on filled-in land extending out into the river. So the river is narrower and deeper than it was in the 18th century.
So if I was visiting the Schuylers or back in the day when they lived here, how would I
if you're visiting the Schuyler's at that time, let's say that you're coming up from New York City, you're probably going to come up by boat. It's the easiest way to travel at the time, much easier than the roads between here and New York. Ben Franklin travels by carriage from this house to New York City at one point and says that even with the skill of his coachman, he was nearly shaken to bits along the stony roads. So instead, you want to come up by boat. You come up the river. This would be the very first house that you would see when you arrived here in Albany, because the city was still 3/4 of a mile north of us. So the first house you see is the Schuyler's home. You're already starting to go, Albany, the Schuyler's, this is a prominent family in this area, and starting to make those connections. When you come to visit the house itself, if you're coming up by water or by carriage, your boat would dock at the very house, or at the docks here in Albany, and then you would probably come by carriage or horse. You might walk, but more likely you're being driven or riding out here. And there's going to be a carriage house down at the very bottom of the hill here. This is where you're probably going to actually be dropped off right in front of the door, but then your carriage is going to be taken there. There's going to be a pathway bringing you up to the front of the house. You'd actually enter straight in through that front door there. So we're headed in through the back today, but we're going to start in that front hall, which would have been the very first space you would enter when you came. It tends to think of itself as a free state. We fought for the Union during the Civil War. Slavery is legal in New York until 1827, meaning Philip Schuyler participates in this practice throughout basically his entire life in one form or another. While the family is living here, all of the work going on in this back courtyard is going to be being performed by enslaved servants and laborers. The household itself is going to be waited on, and all the housekeeping is going to be done by enslaved servants and laborers as well. Usually there's somewhere between 8 to 14 enslaved people here at any one time. During the summer months, our best guess is that they're living actually in this back courtyard, and they may have lived up in the attic in the winter, but Philip doesn't really leave clear records of where they actually live. Simply kind of the working space associated with different tasks for the family. So back here, you would have had a kitchen and nursery building right over to the north. That's roughly where that flower bed is today. Those would be connected through a covered passageway into the dining room. Directly behind us, where this flower bed is, you would have had a public office. Philip is a landlord. Most of his money comes through land management and land speculation. So this is where he's going to meet with investors, or with lower level investors, where he's meeting with people who are paying his rents. Prominent investors meet in the house, but people who are arranging more mercantile or more utilitarian deals with him, he's going to receive them back here. There would be chicken houses along the back wall, working space of all different sorts, and the bathroom would be back here as well. They refer to it as the necessary, but it's more or less an outhouse, a really fancy outhouse, just past where the light and tree are over here. The other term for the necessary at the time, you could refer to it as the House of Commons. We call it the Spice Islands, or the Temple of Easement. All of those are perfectly acceptable slang terms in the 18th century.
Oh, you said kitchen.
That's cool. That is. I had that Oh, yeah.
So what do you think? A room like this, in the 18th century, if you lived in Albany and you walked into this front hall of Schuyler's home, you would just be blown away. Absolutely. It's impressive today, but to put this into perspective for the 18th century, this is what Albany looks like. You have small Dutch-style buildings, usually made of brick. Many of these are only going to be 1 or 2 rooms, and you're going to live your entire life in those rooms, cooking, eating, sleeping, socializing. You may have a loft above, or in some cases a second floor. But for instance, this central home right here, that's going to be a single story with a storage loft above it. If you took 2 of these buildings, you could put them down the front and back hallway of the house that we're standing in right now. The Schuyler's home is about 10 times the size of anything else in Albany. I'd like to pass that around to everyone. Now, Philip and Catherine are both of Dutch descent, even though they're building this English-style home. You've got Philip Schuyler right here, Catherine Van Rensselaer Schuyler in that portrait there. For both of them, Dutch is going to be the first language that they grow up speaking, but from childhood on, they are also learning English. Philip will also speak, English, Dutch, French, German, Latin, Greek, at least some Greek, and has a familiarity with several Native American languages and dialects. Albany is very multicultural. In this time period, you could stand on a corner in Albany and hear 11 different languages spoken at any one time. Pretty reliable. So they're land speculators and landowners. They have tenants who pay rent in the form of cash, crops, and labor, all at the same time. You pay cash rent, but you also give half of everything that you grow to this family, and you have to labor to make improvements on the lands that you're renting from them and other lands that they purchase. So all of the raw materials produced by this arrangement are needed in the Caribbean to feed the sugar plantations, with food, with grains, but also with timber, with flax for textiles, hemp for rope making and textiles. You've got herring fisheries. Philip's timber mills can run 14 saws at a time. They're staffed with slave labor, so this is a very profitable enterprise for him. All these goods go downriver from New York City. They're sold to the Caribbean. That money comes back to the house and pays for this lifestyle. They're also going to be importing rum from the Caribbean, very popular at the time, and most of their slaves are going to be coming either from the Caribbean or second generation born in the Albany area. So it's just kind of this one long leg of that triangle North Atlantic slave trade and that triangle trade. Wonderful at that, very diplomatic, but who also has a tendency to infuriate people. John Adams says on 2 different occasions that somebody really ought to shoot Philip Schuyler, and that it is in the best interest of national security, in fact, that somebody shoot Philip Schuyler. He and Adams never really saw eye to eye. They raised, there's 15 children born to them over the course of their marriage. 7 of those children will die before their first birthday, sadly. Catherine has twins and triplets, very uncommon, but none of those children survive. And 2 of the 8 children who do survive to adulthood will also predecease their parents. When Catherine dies and when Philip dies, only 6 of their 15 children survive them. These kids are born over the course of exactly 25 years. Their oldest and youngest child share a birthday. So you've got 3 daughters, Angelica, Elizabeth, and Margaret, sometimes better known as Peggy. 3 boys, John Bradstreet Schuyler, Philip Jeremiah Rensselaer, and then 2 more girls, Cornelia and Katie. Again, 25 years there between them all. Angelica is closer in age to her mother than she is to her youngest sibling by about 4 years. So does anyone have background questions? Fireplace, when they put an altar there, and a lot of the woodwork up here has had to be restored. The other things lost in this room were the wallpaper, the carpeting, and the ceiling. But again, just like with the other rooms, we have receipts detailing what would have been in the room, and we have visitors' descriptions, so we're actually reproducing those this year. There's going to be a wall-to-wall carpet, probably a floral print wool carpet, a papier-mâché ceiling with a big medallion in the middle, and then a bright blue silk brocaded wallpaper or wall tapestry wherever you see bare plaster. So the color scheme in this room is going to be pretty much blue and gold. Now these chairs that you see here with the shield backs, the sofa set over here, those are original chairs to this house and to this family. The Schuylers buy them in the 1790s, but the upholstery was lost for a very long time until they discovered a tiny little scrap of bright yellow silk underneath one of the arm pads on one of these chairs, and from what was left there, they were able to reproduce what they believe the sort of coloration of that upholstery